human involvement with music goes back 60,000 years. In the National Museum of Slovenia, there are sections of a flute made out of bone that go back to the times of the Neanderthals. Now, it's been a long time since humans have had to make instruments out of bone because as we have evolved, so has music. Believe it or not, there was a time where we couldn't bring up any recording of any piece of music ever, but those dark times are far behind us. Now, I'm going to assume that everyone in here enjoys music to some extent. I know that for me, whenever I'm having a good day or a bad day, I can find the appropriate song and it'll kind of help uplift my mood. And music, it affects each individual differently. For me, it's impacted me to the point where I want to make a career out of it. But it's this strong human connection to music and music's effect on us that shows that music can be used for much more than entertainment. From restructuring the brain, to breaking down social barriers, to aiding in life-saving medical procedures. When talking about playing an instrument, it requires fine motor skills, which is controlled in both halves of the brain. Anita Collins, who holds a PhD in both neuroscience and music education, says when performing an instrument, it, quote, combines the linguistic and mathematical precision in which the left hemisphere is more involved with the novel and creative content that the right excels in, end quote. The constant usage of both halves of the brain leads to an increased development of a part called the corpus callosum, which is the part of the brain that bridges the two halves together. With a more developed bridge, messages can be sent between both halves faster and in more unique ways. Given these neurological benefits, it's no wonder that scientists feel the need to delve deeper into music's implications in the medical field. In talking about her book, The Power of Music, Pioneering Discoveries in the New Science of Song, Elena Maines, who's an award-winning author and director, says, quote, music can be used to coax portions of the brain into taking over for those that are damaged, end quote. And I know it might sound bizarre, but it actually lines up with current medical practice. In some cases, in the operating room, patients have been asked to either sing or play an instrument if that's something they do, as was the case with 25-year-old Dan Fabio. When Dan was 25, he started seeing things and losing his vision. So he went to get a scan and they found a benign tumor growing in his brain. His doctor, Dr. Webb Pilcher, who is the director of neurosurgery at the University of Rochester Medical Center, has spent most of his career mapping out the brain and finding ways to leave his patients with better retention of their cognitive functions. He knew that music was a prominent portion of Dan's life, seeing as Dan was a professional sax player and a music educator himself. So Pilcher made clear that, quote, removing a tumor from the brain can have significant consequences depending on the location. The tumor itself and the operation can damage tissue and disrupt communication between different parts of the brain, end quote. When it came time for Dan's surgery, Dr. Pilcher asked him to play his saxophone on the operating table while his brain was hooked up to a bunch of different machines so that in real time, Dr. Pilcher could see which parts of the brain were responsive and which parts were okay to get rid of. And this resulted in a successful surgery. Dan was able to leave the operating room with 100% retention in all his cognitive functions. It may seem as if I'm talking about music as some sort of all-powerful drug. It's not. If you get hit by a car, don't listen to Mozart, go to a hospital. But music therapy is backed by clinical studies. The American Music Therapy Association, it's partnered with the National Institutes of Health and Services, which is a branch of the U.S. Department of Health and Services. And since 1971, they've been dedicated to the research, the training, and the education of music therapy. Music therapy doesn't just have to be used for extreme cases like Dan Fabio. It can also help to deal with mental illness. The aforementioned National Institutes of Health is partnered with the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. And through it, a man named Ronald Brownstein, who's a Juilliard grad, and a woman named Caroline Whitten, who's the chairwoman of the Youth Orchestra Division of the League of American Orchestras. They've created something called the Me Too Orchestra, not to be confused with the Me Too movement. This is me and then the number 2. It's an orchestra. Currently, its members age range from 13 to 80. There's no audition required, no fees involved. It's very low pressure, but it's a place where people afflicted by mental illness can come and make music together. For Caroline Whitten, who suffers from depression and anxiety, it allowed her to pick up the French horn again. For one of their violinists, Jessica Bodell, who suffers from bipolar disorder, She says, quote, "I cannot count the ways the orchestra helps me. It has allowed me to overcome the shame I felt about living with mental illness." And there's a lot of stories that come out of this orchestra like that, but it's these debilitating illnesses are seemingly overcome through the power of music. Now, I'd like to close with a quote from a music education proponent, Peter Green. He says, quote, "You take some seemingly random marks on a page, you blow air through a carefully constructed tube, and what comes out the other end is a sound that can convey or do things that words cannot," end quote. Music allows us to grow and develop beyond what we already have, and thousands of years after its conception, its place in the world is still being discovered. Thank you.